morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment of Monday Reload. From very high above all the perfidious and mendacious forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Monday. As promised, in a few minutes, I'm going to play you the interview that I did with Representative Tom Kelly. Tom is a really good example of how conservatives agree on pretty much most of the issues. However, there are some of those issues that we disagree about how to tackle them. A good example of that is the Second Amendment. I believe that the Second Amendment means what it says, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. It says very clearly that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, which means all the time, every day, without exception. There are no exceptions in the Second Amendment. It doesn't say, except if it's this type of gun, or except if you're in this particular place. It doesn't say those things at all. Another one of those issues that you'll never change my mind on is abortion. It is never right, nor has it ever been right, to kill a baby. If you've been listening to Cowboy State Politics for any length of time, you already know that I think that abortion is murder, and you can't convince me otherwise. We can have a debate, however, about how to stop it. Personally, I think we should take every opportunity we can to restrict and stop the god-awful practice of killing an innocent human being. For me, it's pretty simple. Nobody has a right to murder another innocent human being, period. It doesn't matter if that human being is only 8 weeks old or 80 years old. It's still the same. This year, the legislature passed House Bill 64, which requires an ultrasound before a doctor can prescribe a baby-killing pill. The governor vetoed that bill, and then the legislature overrode it with a 2/3 vote. There were only a handful of legislators that consistently voted against House Bill 64 throughout the entire process, and one of those was Representative Tom Kelly. His reason for voting that way, although I strongly disagree with it, is pretty simple. That it would be mandating a medical procedure akin to forcing you to wear a mask. The only problem with that is nobody is mandating that anybody have an abortion. An abortion is a choice, probably 99.9% of the time. And so, according to the law, if you choose to have an abortion, you are also choosing to submit yourself to an ultrasound before you are given a pill that is going to kill another innocent human being. If you don't want to go through an ultrasound, then don't make a choice to take an innocent human life. Tom's other argument, which, by the way, I do think has some merit, I didn't say that I agree with it, I said it has some merit, is about the discursive impacts of actually including exceptions in any abortion ban. Essentially what he's saying is that, on the one hand, we are saying that abortion is wrong, except in these other cases where it would be right. And that undercuts our message that abortion is wrong. Now, I didn't really bring this up during our interview, but here's my take on it. And I have 3 basic responses to this. The first one being that we're not saying abortion is right in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I think it's actually the opposite of that. But what the law is basically doing is admitting to the political reality that we can't ban abortion outright. And so we're making it as inconvenient as we can, while at the same time protecting the life of the mother, because if you take an abortion pill past a certain amount of time, then you could kill yourself. My second response, and you'll hear this one come out during the course of the interview, is basically what Tom is saying is that since we can't ban abortion outright and we politically have to include these exceptions, that the discursive impacts outweigh any benefit that the law could achieve. And let me just define what I mean by the term discursive. To the 1828, and I quote, "Discursive means proceeding regularly from premises to consequences. It's argumentative. It's reasoning." So in other words, that the message that the law is sending is worse than the benefit that we would gain from it. We've seen this very argument in court argumentation on the Life as a Human Right Act. That how can you say that everyone has the right to life if you're going to include exceptions to that premise? I understand the argument, but I don't buy the real-world impact of it. Statistically, if a pregnant mother gets an ultrasound, they are far less likely to go through with an abortion. And politically, I think that conservatives have to be more amenable to incrementalism. That on a wide variety of issues, we're not going to be able to do the whole thing all at once. Think about the Second Amendment legislation, which Tom does bring up during the course of the interview. I don't know a single conservative that is okay with concealed weapons permits. However, the ban on gun-free zones makes it a law that if you're going to carry a firearm in a school or in a government meeting, that you have to have a concealed weapons permit. But I haven't talked to a single Second Amendment supporter that says that ban on gun-free zones wasn't absolutely a win for Wyoming citizens. In other words, we should get what we can get and work on the rest of it later. Well, I have bloviated long enough on the subject, and we should get to the interview. And we'll do that in a couple of minutes. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org.
Many Americans are growing increasingly concerned about the rapidly growing U.S. government deficits, recognizing the additional printing of paper money devalues U.S. currency. To compensate, American gold and silver coins will provide wealth protection. U.S. Coin Capital provides physical gold and silver coins delivered directly to our clients. You can reach us at 1-800-878-2646, uscoincapital.com.
Today's program is also brought to you by Morton Buildings. We're almost done with one of Wyoming's seasons, winter. And we're quickly moving into Wyoming's other season, construction. And so it's time to get that building you've been dreaming about all winter long off the drawing board. First step, call Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They're the experts in metal building construction. They've been doing it longer than anybody else, and they do a much better job than anybody else. So it doesn't matter what type of building you're thinking about, whether it's a garage or a barn or maybe something bigger, like a roping arena or a big warehouse. Nick and Jesse are the two guys you need to talk to first. Again, their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the program. That way you can be notified every single time there's a brand new episode of Cowboy State Politics. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. And now, on to the interview. Welcome back to the program. The other day, I sat down with Representative Tom Kelly to talk about a variety of subjects. We talked about spending, schools, and, of course, his vote on House Bill 64. Here is our interview. For the first time on the program after the legislative session, I have Representative Tom Kelly with me. Tom, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you. Actually, this is the first time since the divorce kids. I mean, no one ever got sole custody of me, so it's good to see you guys again.
Yeah. So I guess where I want to start is you're a new legislator, got done with your first session. Tell me your thoughts on it. Riff for me. What do you think?
Well, what I was thinking is we were successful beyond what I expected. I expected that we would be cohesive in the House and we would get a lot of the campaign, I wouldn't say campaign promises, but the issues on which we had campaigned, we would address them. We would pass the bills that we said we were going to try to pass. Wasn't sure what was going to happen in the Senate. And I was pretty sure that Governor Gordon would veto a lot of what we did. And what happened is we ended up forming a fairly sizable majority in the House quite often, passing bill after bill with veto-proof majorities. And, you know, the whole narrative of the Freedom Caucus, which is numbered in the teens, not the 30s, but we had majorities on most of our big issues in the 40s, sometimes 50s.
Yeah, it was actually interesting to me because I think, you know, among the conservatives that I counted, I thought maybe 35, maybe 36 people that would stick together pretty consistently. But like you say, a lot of votes ended up including several more people that I guess at first I didn't consider. I guess I didn't think that they would side with the conservatives nearly as much as they did.
I would say the number I came at, the hardcore group, the wild bunch, according to the governor, the number came out to be 34. That was the solid foundation that typically didn't break on most issues.
So what do you attribute the extra folks siding with the other 34?
Because we had campaigned and won on these issues. This is what the voters largely supported. Despite the narrative we see in there, like only 27%, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
You know, you can get an accurate reading on the public's view by polling 500 people, less than 1%. So when you poll and you get 1 in 4 voters showing up, yeah, that was a mandate. I don't care how they try and spin it, and they ultimately come out and say, well, only this percentage of people voted. I ran the math using the same math used to try and discredit the conservatives' win. The Freedom Caucus in Wyoming was more popular than Barack Obama when he won the nomination in 2008. So that math just doesn't hold up. It was a groundswell. It's what most Republican voters wanted. And you had people, if they were on the fence, if they were more moderate, their voters were saying, yes, we want this. Because if they were hearing a deluge of voters saying vote against this, they probably would have. Most of the representatives I worked with, and I know some people might just say I'm saying something like this to curry favor or make friends, but you guys know me personally. I don't do well at making friends anyway. Most legislators I work with appeared to be of solid integrity. They are honest where they stood. There were no surprise votes. We talked ahead of time. They would stick to what they said they were going to do. They are open to talking about modifications to policy. But there were a handful that I would say were unfortunately quite misleading in their campaigns with what they stood for and how they ended up performing in the legislature was in stark opposition to what they had told voters.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't appreciate that at all, but I was pleasantly surprised how few that number actually was.
Well, I mean, you guys beat most of them. They would have said that to their constituents. Is there anything that you were surprised about, that you maybe had a preconceived notion before going down to Cheyenne? Anything really stick out to you?
Not really. No, not really. It turned out to be exactly what I expected it to be. Down to the point of incredibly boring and mind-numbing filibusters to rushing bills through committee without enough time to really vet what we needed to talk about. I will say that there were too many bills. There were just too many damn bills. And I understand the reason for that, because you had a leadership that had put a lot of good ideas on the shelf for years. So we get new leadership and the floodgates open with all these bills. And we tried to cram through so many things. You had a lot of people thinking, this is my chance. They had pet projects. They had bills they wanted to get passed. We had what, Ken? 575 bills in the end? And we got through less than half of them.
Interestingly enough, this session was not the highest number of bills that has gone through the legislature. So during the session, I spent a little bit of time looking at the number of bills in previous sessions, and I don't know, there was one year, maybe it was like 2013, 2014, where there were significantly more bills than there were this year. So I can't imagine what it would have been like trying to sift through 700 or 800
now more bills introduced or more bills they actually got to? Okay.
Introduced, yeah.
Because we had 575 bills, I think, numbered, but the majority of them never got to a committee.
Yeah, and that was one of the disappointing things that happened. I mean, for me anyway, is there was a number of longtime legislators that spent like you mentioned before, a significant amount of time filibustering. I guess we shouldn't really complain about that too much, because in the past two previous sessions, I mean, we kind of showed them how to do it.
Oh, yeah, we have to be completely honest about that. I talked to my new conservative friends, the veteran legislators, and as people, you could say, in the opposition, were taking up floor time with slow walking some bills. I turned and looked at some of them and said, "Does this technique look familiar?" And they all just kind of smiled. Could be. So they were very honest that, yes, we did the same type of thing when we were trying to slow legislation. We didn't like that. That's just how a legislature works. The only issue I had with it was the BS media spin that a bunch of mindless people were voting lockstep without debating bills. That wasn't debate. That was delay. It was just like the die was already cast. We had already talked about it. We were bringing up points that had just been talked about the day before or the hour before. So when you're up there, again, saying the same thing over and over and over again, yeah, we're not going to get up and waste more time saying the same retort we just said yesterday.
So did you get any bills passed this session? Or, I mean, there were a number of first-year legislators that got at least a piece of legislation through.
I didn't run or sponsor a single bill. There wasn't a reason for me to. I talked about some people about this, and they said, "What's your bill?" I said, "I don't have one." Why not? Because everything on which I campaigned already has at least one bill. It didn't. I campaigned on property tax relief. I campaigned on Second Amendment rights. I campaigned on controlling spending. And all that was there. We had an appropriations committee that was looking to make sure we didn't pass this big bloated supplemental budget. Senate surprised the hell out of me and decided, forget it. We don't even need one, which I could go with in going forward. It caused a little bit of legislative chaos temporarily, but it worked out just fine. We governed. The government is still functioning. Programs are still running. Plows still plowed the streets. So this narrative that the conservatives can't govern, they're really BS. Reaching for straws now to try and, well, you might have passed bills, but it's not what the people wanted. And I'll tell you, when you pass a bill that has a conglomeration of conservatives and moderates and maybe a Democrat or two, the people of Wyoming wanted that.
I mean, just looking at it from the outside, I saw the polling that the Freedom Caucus had done the summer before this session, and a bunch of their legislative priorities were the top issues mentioned in that poll. So, I mean, I think that the Freedom Caucus and the leadership were being responsive to what they heard on the campaign trail. So you got nominated to a committee, the recalibration committee. You just mentioned one of the issues would be you're interested in would be cutting spending. So talk to me about what you think that's going to be like. What would you like to see happen with the recalibration committee?
Okay, so first what I'm looking at is a ridiculous court decision that says the legislature has violated the Wyoming Constitution because we're not funding mental health care, we're not feeding the kids, and we're not buying them all new computers, and we're not paying for armed security. None of that is actual part of an educational curriculum. So right there, we're dealing with thankfully, the executive is appealing that ruling. I don't know how that'll go, but that's the backdrop of it. And already, those who are the forces of government schools, I wouldn't say of public education, because public education doesn't mean government school. And we prove that with the ESAs getting passed. They think this really means, you're going to be forced to spend even more on the government schools. Doesn't mean that at all. That might have been the intention of the one judge, but you're never going to convince the people of Wyoming that it's a constitutional violation that every kid doesn't get a new laptop every year. That's insanity. And then you couple that with the fact that We got through a significant, I get some people are disappointed. They wanted the 50% exemption, but the fact that we got an across the board 25% exemption signed by the governor, that's significant property tax relief. You got a $4,000 bill, your bill's going down $1,000. That's something. However, property taxes fund government. So there will be a slight reduction in residential revenues. We don't understand the dynamics of it though. The fact that everybody who owns a home will have hundreds or thousands of more dollars in their pocket may mean an increase in local sales taxes. So we still don't know how that's going to pan out, but we've got the backdrop of the two factors: a ridiculous court order that makes it sound like we have to spend even more than we already do, and the potential for less revenue coming into the school. Even though it's constitutionally mandated, we fund the schools, so the schools would be the absolute last thing that we would cut. I'm looking to somehow, as I look through the model, look through the court cases, and look through the history of it, find a way to get the onerous regulations off local districts that force them to hire so many administrators to deal with all the, I can't say paperwork anymore, but all the spreadsheets, all the online forms. And if we could get more resources funneled into the classroom, because the best thing for an education is a good teacher. A good teacher doesn't need software, doesn't need to order pizzas, doesn't have to have all the latest technology. You could just have a room full of kids and a whiteboard and have some of the best education. We see it across the world. So what we need are teachers that are solid and dedicated, and we have to be able to recruit them to live and work and stay in Wyoming. And part of that is compensation. That's part of it. Because if the pay's no good, if somebody literally can't afford to take the job, they're not going to. Once they realize that I can live on the salary, working conditions, that's the other one. And when you have onerous mandates coming in of what teachers can and cannot say, or what they must teach or must not teach, whether it's coming from the state or the federal level, it's part of the reason for teacher burnout. They're being pulled in many different directions for insufficient pay. So the short answer is, if we could funnel money from administrative costs into the classroom to the students, and we wouldn't even need to raise spending on education, and we would see the government schools perform better. And this is not even taking into account the fact that ESAs, we don't know what the effects are going to be. We don't know because that comes from the general fund, not from the school fund. We don't know if schools are going to end up with more money per student, even if we actually put less money into that fund. Less money comes out of the fund.
When you look at the administrative costs of Wyoming schools, I mean, the numbers really they really are pretty mind-blowing. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was talking with Representative Nyman, now Speaker Nyman, and he pointed out to me that in the past 4 years, and again, this was 2 years ago, that enrollment in Wyoming schools had gone down about 1,900 kids, give or take a few. But during that same time period, administration and staff went up 3,600 positions. So more than double the decrease in the amount of students in the classroom. Have you given any thought to siloing the money? You know, we have a number of different things that we fund in education. There's equipment and, facilities, and of course salaries and insurance, benefits and all that. Well, one of the problems is you guys may say, all right, we're going to give you a 10% raise to all teachers and staff. Well, the district doesn't have to follow what the legislature says because we fund in a block grant. They could take that money and buy new football pads or new computers or whatever. There's nothing forcing a school district to spend that money in any one particular area. But I think it's at least a conversation worth having if we could silo a specific portion of the block grant for this one's for teachers, this one's for administration, this one's for activities. Have you given any thought to that?
Absolutely. And I'm going to give you kind of a politician's answer. Well, actually, It's more of an honest man's answer. I don't know what I'm going to do with that yet. So I'm not going to blow smoke up your rear end. I've thought about it. Here's the issue I have with it, because I understand the intention. I think about the feds giving money to states and then the strings that come attached and what happens with the increase of bureaucracy and the hoops that have to be jumped through to go ahead and spend that money. And I'd be concerned about recreating that at the state level for local districts. We know I've got that libertarian small government, local government streak, and I don't want to go the route of the state mandating to local governments what to do. In fact, I think the more mandates we have, the more money they have to put in administration to report back to the state that they're following the mandates. I would really like to see the local districts have much more say over their pay, their curriculum, how they run their districts. And what I would say to the voters is if you have school boards that are wasting money on new athletic fields when you've got teachers who can't take a job because they're not getting paid enough, well, then you need to bounce your school board and work at that level. Some people are, once the state starts handing out the so-called solutions, then people just forget the local elections and they just go running to the representatives and senators and say, force our school district to do this. And that is not the direction I typically like to go. It's not, if there's a practical solution, if it's the least worst solution, I'll back it. But it's not my go-to.
One of those bills where I think that you exhibited what you were just talking about, and I don't remember the bill number, but it was the one that said school board candidates needed to list their party affiliation on the ballot.
Yeah. It's like, the best part about this, initially my knee-jerk reaction was a no to that. And then Representative Yin stood up there and he made his argument for why the bill was bad, but he convinced me it was a good idea. He was saying that there were people in Teton County who ran for school board who, if people knew their actual party affiliation, wouldn't have gotten elected. And I think the argument was like, there'd be Republicans not getting elected in my county if we did this. And I said, well, that's an argument for the bill. The more information,
Absolutely.
The better. But as I thought about it, another argument came from Representative Provenza. She brought up the fact that I think it's the Hatch Act, that federal employees can no longer volunteer in the local school boards. And we do have federal employees who currently do that. They'd have to step down. That's an unintended consequence I don't like, but that was not enough to sway me. That was a bad, but if the pros outweighed the cons, I would have voted for it. And the more I looked at it, and what I finally said on the floor when I spoke against it was, all this bill does is force a candidate to claim a party. It tells us nothing about their politics or how they'll perform once they're there. And I looked around and made eye contact with people on the House floor. And I said, as we know from here, there are people who mark parties, and then it is not indicative of how they're going to vote. So I don't see this as being helpful.
Well, let's talk about Provenza's argument just for a second. Would that not also apply to any partisan office if you're a federal employee?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was there when she made that argument, and I was like, well, you kind of have a point. But still, it would apply to any partisan office anyway. The one thing that stuck in my head when that whole debate was going on is, okay, so we all know that a lot of people who really aren't Republicans run under the Republican brand so that they can get elected. Okay, we know that happens. Well, that would still happen at the school board level. Would that not give us something to hold school board members accountable with? To say, look, you ran on this platform. Now you're voting for stuff like boys and girls bathrooms and all this crazy stuff. I mean, at least there's some accountability there.
It could, and I saw arguments both ways. And one argument that I dismissed offhanded was this idea that we're not going to bring politics into our school boards. I'm just we're not going to bring water into our fish tank. I'm like, I said on the floor, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's partisan. Let's not pretend. And then they switched their argument to, well, should it be political? Doesn't matter. It is. But I didn't see this as a fix for that problem. The potential consequences I saw being more negative than positive. If anything, I think the first races that should become partisan are like city council, because I
happen to agree with you.
That's highly political. If anything, we should make city like the Sheridan City Council. That should be nonpartisan. Is ridiculous. I mean, Chicago is nonpartisan, and the only thing that does is that they have Democrats and socialists, but there are no Republicans there. But calling it nonpartisan doesn't take politics out of it. You're just not allowed to have an official party endorsement, and we started doing that anyway.
Right, exactly right.
You don't, all it does is you don't have a party on the ballot. In the end, for localities, party identification makes more sense at the federal and state level. Gives you a better idea what those platforms are. People are more likely to have to adhere to them. The issues of a school board, they're not quite going to be the same. Obviously, politics leak their way in there at that point, but ultimately, you have to vet the local candidates and know who they are, and you can't go on what they say anyway. You have to go on what they've done in the past, because people wanting to get elected will typically, many people will say whatever they think they need to say to get votes, which is why I'm surprised I did as well as I did, because I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and said whatever I think. So we should probably, because you brought this up online, talk about House Bill 64.
Oh, we're going there.
Oh, I'm still getting flack for that one, and I'm not bending an inch on that. In fact, anything, you might be surprised with how I view the whole thing, because...
Let's talk about that, because that was another vote where you definitely had a difference of opinion than most of the folks you've been voting with the entire session. In fact, you were one of the few people that voted against that bill, and then voted against overriding the governor's veto, too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and that was a shrinking number. The people voting against it, I think it was, well, that might be incorrect, but I was the only anti-abortion no vote. Let's put it that way. All the pro-choicers voted predictably. All the pro-lifers voted predictably. And I was the one where I voted no, like a bunch of heads spun around and looked at me. Like,
it's funny, and Ken and I talk about this a lot, that when you're down on the bottom of the fishbowl, you have a very different perspective than if you're up sitting on the rim of the fishbowl and you're looking down on all this. And the reaction in the gallery, and I don't remember offhand who was sitting around me, but they were surprised when you voted against it. And I think the comment I made when I turned around was this: well, Tom has a libertarian streak in him, so maybe that's what it is, but we'll have to ask him.
Oh, it's definitely not pro-abortion, but it is the libertarian streak.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, it is that. This is how I saw that bill, and I was approached before session by Speaker Nyman to co-sponsor it. And the email I sent to him, I don't remember it word for word, I said, I can't support this legislation. Number one, it's a direct violation of Plank 10 of the Republican Party. An ultrasound, unlike abortion, is a form of healthcare. This is a healthcare procedure. And not only is it mandating a healthcare procedure, but in the same sentence, it's talking about murder as if it were a healthcare procedure. I don't want to elevate abortion onto the level of an ultrasound. I'm like, and so he just said, thanks for your support. And I when we talked about it privately, I said, listen, I can't vote for this. I'm not going to fight you guys on it. I don't want to give the other side any ammunition, which they would, anything I said, they would have taken and run with it. So I just sat quietly knowing I wasn't going to vote for it. In fact, the only time I considered voting yes was that if the veto override came down to one vote, I was on the fence on what I was going to do. Ultimately, I probably would have stuck to principle and said no, but that would have been fear of taking the heat. I think I wouldn't have caved under the pressure, though.
Now, you're kind of in a different position than many of your colleagues in that you're a precinct man in the Sheridan County Republican Party. And a lot of what we talk about is the platform.
Right.
And I honestly want to commend you that there aren't that many people that are down on that floor that vote according to the platform. Representative Pendergraft does. In fact, he's been admonished for saying the word Republican on the floor more than a couple times. But let me ask you this, and this is, you and I, we have a difference of opinion on this, but I think it's only in how we view the platform. My thinking is nobody is mandating that you have an abortion. So if you have an abortion, that would be a choice, an elective choice. So then, would it not also follow that whatever comes after that choice or what after that decision would also be a choice?
You could say that. That's one way of looking at it. But then I tend to look at other procedures, like the mandate for a COVID vaccine. Well, it's not really a mandate. You chose to take this job here. You don't have to work here. So, by choosing to work here, you're choosing to get the vaccine. Or I thought this really got the point across to people who are Second Amendment purists like myself. Imagine the state says, you need to have a mental health evaluation before you purchase a firearm. Now, it's not a mandate because you're choosing to buy a gun. So you're choosing to have the mental health evaluation mandated by the state. For me, it was opening the door up that the state can mandate stuff if we think we have got a darn good reason. And I understand, listen, I understand the arguments in favor of it. I would sit there and I would listen to talking about the potential harm done to a woman by taking this toxin to murder her child too late in the game. And in the back of my head, I would hear my own voice saying, we are not sent here to save competent adults from themselves. That's the first thing, because they're killing the kid anyway. If they hurt themselves, it was kind of a callous feeling of, oh, well, if you're going to take that, this is going to come across really harsh. And some people may be a little bit shocked at where my views are on this, because they're thinking like, oh, he's folding. Maybe he's going pro-choice.
Yeah, I don't see that
hardly.
happening.
No, I kind of viewed it like this. We're saying it's okay to murder your child if you take a picture of it first. And some people have said, well, they might change their mind if it saves one life. And I'm like, well, you know what? That was kind of the argument with like the COVID vaccines.
You're exactly right.
If it saves one life, give up the liberty on this. And I was talking with my daughter Lillian about this, and she's just gotten herself into podcasting recently. And this is stuff I would never say on the floor, but I absolutely view abortion, all abortion, is nothing less than premeditated homicide.
Absolutely
of the most vulnerable and innocent human beings on the planet. They haven't even had a chance to do something wrong yet. And they're being murdered by their own parents. It's the most heinous crime I could think of. So somebody going to get an ultrasound before they take a drug to poison their child to kill them is tantamount to me to a father walking to his child's bedroom with the intention to smother his baby with a pillow. Or let's say, let's go this way, a gun. He's going to go in there and shoot his child. And people are like, oh, that's not the same. Yes, it is. That's premeditated murder of your child. Now, the bill to me felt like, well, if the father's going to do this, he should be mandated to take a gun safety class. So if on his way there, he doesn't trip and shoot himself in the face, which I'd be like, oh, well, the kid made it. That's what happens when you try and murder your own kid. So I have, and some people would say, an unnecessarily hostile view towards people trying to kill their children.
Absolutely, you should.
Now, to full disclosure, though, I understand that most pro-choice people, the overwhelming majority, if not all of them, don't view it as murder.
No.
And somebody walking to a bedroom with a gun knows they're about to commit murder. Everybody knows that. They're not, unless they're completely out of their minds. And I mentioned this on the floor too, because when we talked about 125, declaring abortion as not health care, and I said we talk past one another because you don't see these as human beings. I do. So I have this terrible issue with legitimizing abortion at any time, which is why we are losing the narrative. Mm-hmm. The pro-life movement has been winning battles and we are losing the war. I see it, abortion bans failing in state after state, conservative Montana putting abortion into their constitution, and we are losing the narrative because we try to convince people this is murder. Except if the father's a rapist. Now it's not murder. We can punish the child because the father's a criminal. Or it's not necessarily murder if you take a family video of your child with an ultrasound ahead of time. And I understand the idea that maybe somebody would change their mind if they saw that. And I understand the medical need for it. But since an ultrasound is an actual healthcare procedure, it should be between the patient and the doctor. The state shouldn't be coming in and telling doctors how to do their job at that point. And somebody might say, well, that's our argument for abortion. But again, abortion isn't healthcare because no legitimate healthcare procedure results in the intentional death of a human being. I mean, the death penalty could be considered healthcare then. Euthanasia, that's not healthcare when you intentionally kill a human being. But the pro-choice side doesn't see it as homicide because they don't see the unborn as people, which I do. And that's why we're losing the narrative, David.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you.
Every time we pass a bill that says it's murder, except for you've undercut your own argument, and more people see it. It's like, well, it's not really murder because if you've got a darn good reason to do it, I know we have justifiable homicide, but nobody's going to claim that an infant is intentionally threatening their life at that point. And even when somebody says we should have exceptions for the life of the mother, I agree with that, but that doesn't mean, all that means is you don't need to intentionally kill the baby to save the mom. If the mother needs a procedure that threatens the life of the baby, ultimately I would say that's her choice to make that decision at that point. But I don't see why at any point, I've never seen anything in the medical annals. I've never heard a medical professional who's pro-life say there's ever an incident where you have to intentionally kill the baby before treating the mom.
Well, I absolutely appreciate your point of view on it, and I think you make a very convincing argument. And, Ken and I talk about this next part a lot, in that the position that I'm in, I have the luxury of being, kind of the purist, right? Of saying, oh, no, this is black and white. And on a lot of different issues, down on the floor, things aren't black and white. They're 100 different shades of gray. But on this one, I mean, I agree with you that if you're going to say that it's okay in these cases, whether it's rape or is it incest, well, I mean, technically, I guess you are saying that, yeah, well, it's okay, and that's definitely something that I wouldn't ever want to do. Now, Ken, you wanted to jump in here?
Yeah. If you're a Coast Guard captain and you're going out to save some shipwrecked victims, and you have room to be able to handle 30, you can carry away 30. And you get out there and there are 50 people floating in the water. Do you turn around and go home because you can't save everybody and every life is critical? Or do you get as far as you can get? And I think that's what it comes to in a practical sense on the House floor is, yeah, ideally it's not perfect. Every time we compromise on the Second Amendment, my stomach rolls over. But we moved the needle.
And you're right. You would save it whoever you could at that point.
Now, the way that and where I was going with that comment is that, I understand the political necessity of incrementalism. And frankly, I think that conservatives need to be a little bit more receptive to incrementalism in that, the end goal is we don't want any abortion, period. It's murder. It is premeditated murder. There is no way that you're ever going to convince me that it's not. But is it politically, can we get that achieved in, a single session? I don't think that we could get a bill through that said, abortion is banned 100% of the time. I just don't see that.
No, absolutely not. And if we tried to do a constitutional amendment to say that, it would fail, probably 2-1.
So I think that this argument, and I think the three of us are on the same page with this, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg sort of argument, in that the politics of it is what I'm saying.
Well, I haven't gotten to the big picture yet here.
All right, go ahead.
Because you're right about the incrementalism, but that is the incrementalism. That's exactly what I meant by winning battles and losing the war. Because every time we have one of those incremental battles, we undercut the notion again that it's murder. As we slowly make it more inconvenient to commit murder for some reason. I think back to the argument over slavery. Slavery didn't end with the 13th Amendment.
No.
Slavery had died years before that because the people of America had realized these are human beings. This is not property to buy, sell, mistreat, terminate, whatever. These are people, and slavery is wrong. And when society finally understood, the overwhelming majority, that slaves were human beings who had the same God-given rights as every other human being, that's when slavery died. And then the government later caught up and codified it. They never would have been able to do it if they had incrementally passed laws making it harder and harder to keep slaves. you, if anything, they might have drawn it out because the British Empire ended slavery before the United States did.
Way before.
Decades
Well, the
before.
slave trade, anday.
Well, no, they banned slavery, I think, in the 1830s, but I'm just speaking off the top of my head. I might have that, but I know it was decades before. So for abortion to end, it means that people need to understand what it really is. And if we keep winning these battles that say it's murder except for, we're undercutting a new society, new younger people growing up and realizing this is just the wrong thing to do. I don't see abortion ever becoming illegal until it's already died in the public sphere and the overwhelming majority of people recognize it for what it is. The top-down approach of passing a law saying this is murder and we'll come after you or else, when half the country doesn't see it that way, we've gotten this bizarre, untenable consensus of, not consensus, but there's an overwhelming majority of Americans, whether they call themselves pro-life or pro-choice, say it should be legal, but then we just argue over the circumstances under which murder should be legal. Like when I hear a pro-choicer say to me, well, I think it's a woman's choice, but it should never be used as birth control. Well, why not? If it's not a human being, it's a woman's choice. If it's a human being, there should be no exceptions to have it ever. If it's not a human being, there should be no restrictions by the government ever. So what we have to do is convince the majority, the overwhelming majority of people, it's a human being. And I'll say it one more time. You pass one of those laws that says it's a human being, except if the father's a pervert. You've undercut your own argument.
Yeah, I mean, that's the politics is downstream from culture argument. That until you change the hearts and minds of the people, then it's not ever going to be outlawed. And I mean, we've got a lot of evidence of that. I mean, I don't know how many court cases there are resulting from attempts to overturn abortion bans that we've passed. There's the abortifacients one. There's the Life is a Human Right Act. That's two. The trigger bill, which, I mean, that's kind of now defunct, but still, I mean, it's a third one. And now there's a court challenge to this one. And so, I mean, I think that it's one of those issues for me anyway, that in my mind it is so black and white, but the politics of it make it seriously complicated. What you got, Ken?
Yeah. One of the things I hated when I would talk to legislators before I was down there was the argument, well, it's complicated.
Oh, it is, though.
Yeah, everything's complicated. Everything is personally complicated. And I have made the decision some time ago that I will do as much good as I can while I'm given the opportunity to be there. And at the risk of quoting Cody Wiley, if it saves one life. No, but my point is I'm going to do everything I can to move the needle the right way. I understand Tom's argument about degrading the perfection of the argument, but my view is we're never going to get there. I have a biblical worldview which says the world is going to end in a big mess. I don't believe that we're ever going to win that on a completely pure thing, so I would rather save some than let everybody drown. That's just where I go.
Well, then I will counter that argument saying that this incrementalism is killing more kids than it's saving. And the reason I say that is because since Roe versus Wade, the abortion rate in America steadily declined for decades.
And now it's skyrocketed.
And since we started, it's only murder if it's rebounded. For the first time in decades, the abortion rate is going back up because we're losing the narrative and more people are not seeing it as murder. I think it's backfired on us passing these almost abortion bans, except for rape and incest. That was the big mistake right there. I think in the short term, it might have saved some people. I think in the long term, we're losing more children to abortion now than we have in a long time, as more and more people no longer see it as murder.
See, and those exceptions, just 1 second,
Yeah.
Ken. I have a really hard time with them for a couple of reasons. First of all, if it's rape or incest, it's still a baby. I mean, there is no way that you can get around it. That little kid didn't do anything to be in that situation, and there's no other place where we punish the victim for the crimes of the offender, and that's what that is. The other exceptions, this whole life of the mother business, that's pretty rare. And in cases where that's actually a question, it's not a matter of abortion, it's a matter of triage. You're not going to have any doctor that looks at that and says, well, is this abortion or not? Geez, this car wreck is pretty bad. No, the doctor's going to look at it and say, all right, who can I save and who am I not going to be able to save? That's triage. That's not a question of abortion. Ectopic pregnancies. Well, that's not an abortion either. That's a medical necessity. That kid is never going to be born. If it's allowed to continue, it could possibly kill the mother.
They both die.
So, really, when you look at those exceptions, I don't think that they hold a lot of water. Now, before I said, that there's a question of the political possibility of passing those. And I think that ties in with your point, Tom, that our culture is not at a place where they're going to accept it. So then the question, gentlemen, and I'll shut up and let you talk a minute here, Ken. The question is, so how do we change that? So go.
Well, two things, if you set aside what you just asked. I thought you said just a little bit ago, Tom, you were not a debater.
Yeah, you're doing a heck of a job.
You're handling yourself fairly well. You're still wrong, but you're handling yourself fairly well.
Okay, so the difference, just to clarify that for everybody, I think we said before we started recording, I'm not much of a debater. And that's because I see a debater as somebody who comes in with the mission to win the argument. And for me, I like to have discussions, and I like to be understood.
If you win the argument, there's no more debate.
Yeah, so I'm not trying to debate. I'm not trying to change any minds as much as I'm just trying to have people understand what goes on in this miswired head of mine.
I don't think it's miswired at all.
The other one, and I'm going to actually throw you a little bit of a bone because, I said I like to move the needle when I can. I voted against the ESA bill. And I voted against it because at the last minute they added pre-K. That was a bridge too far. I couldn't accept that. That was what I felt. Once you put that out there, you're never going to get it back. And I think in that case, I'm making the same argument to myself that you made on the abortion issue.
Yeah, and that was definitely, I respect that point of view. There were several votes where conservatives were split on. The whole marching lockstep thing was a complete fallacy. And talking to good reps like Mike Schmid and yourself, we saw very differently on some issues. But the question is, though, what do we do about abortion then? Because some people might say, well, Tom's just going to throw his hands up and do nothing then. Well, that's not true. Like I voted for the surgical hospital admitting procedures for surgical abortion.
The regulations of abortion.
Exactly that. And I'm not saying that abortion's okay. What I'm saying is that I saw an opportunity to make it more inconvenient to profit off the murder. Because even if Wyoming were to 100% ban abortion across the board, it saves very few lives because people just go to Billings and Rapid City and Fort Collins and do it anyway. Unless you're going to start going all Soviet and saying we're going to start tracking people down who leave the state to have abortions. So Wyoming's not going to save many lives having the smallest population in the country. And we could do a lot more by leading on the thought process. And one of what I would like to see from legislators is, for one, never a single cent of government money ever going to cover anything related to abortion. If we can't get it outlawed, at least we shouldn't be paying for it. Now, I know we have laws in the books with that type of thing, but we even have like insurance companies at the federal level. We have mandates that they cover that type of stuff. Well, that's where we need pro-life legislators to say, no, you know what? Let's remove these mandates on insurance companies. If you would like to buy a policy that covers abortion, go ahead. But people should be able to buy and pool into policies that don't cover it. Making something less and less socially acceptable just by the way you treat it is something we're not going to fund it. We're not going to touch it. We want nothing to do with it. Can move the needle on the younger generation and saying, Mom, why don't they cover this? And mom says, because it's not health care, it's murder. That's why. And then the kid can't say, but, what if the dad's a rapist? You also have to continue electing pro-life legislators, because even if there's little we can do at this point, because the state's already passed 2 bans and they're held up in the courts, there's not much more you can really do at that point other than things like the ultrasound to try and make it more inconvenient. But if you start electing a bunch of pro-choice legislators,
It's a totally different ballgame.
oh my goodness! Now the state's in funding it, promoting it. I was actually signed on to the abortion chemical wastewater bill, and it turned out to be an ugly, bad bill that was untenable. So we just let it die. But I liked the idea that we had to treat murdered babies as murdered babies and dispose of them as human beings, because that undercuts the industry of selling aborted materials. And people try to pretend that doesn't happen, and that's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, we put that in the long list of true conspiracy theories, because part of the abortion industry is selling the byproducts. It's selling the corpses. So if we could undercut that industry, then there's less of that market incentive for people to get out there, your body, your choice. And what they're really doing is they're seeing green. I'm absolutely disgusted by the abortion for money industry. So if we can get the government out of that, if we could do things to trip up that illegitimate industry, I'm all for that.
We have a phrase called evangelical Christians, but they keep on using that word, and I do not think they mean what they think they're saying.
Like when somebody says, like, I'm like Tom, I'm a libertarian. You keep on using that word.
Yeah,
I don't think
evangelical. So somebody asked the question, what do we do about abortion? The fact is, government will never solve this issue.
That's correct.
So I choose to do what government can do, and maybe temper it. But we as Christians have not been evangelical. We've been more legislatical. There's a new word for you. We would, rather than do the work ourselves, make a law and assume that will fix things. Well, God proved that when he gave man the law, and they found that they could not obey. And we do the same thing when we hire preachers. We hire a preacher and we think he's the evangelist. He's the one that needs to go out there and meet people and bring them to Christ. That's not what was taught in Scripture. And it is not the legislature's job to turn people against abortion. It is the pro-lifers. You mentioned earlier, Tom, we need more pro-life people in the legislature. Yeah, we need more pro-life people everywhere. But those who are not in the legislature can still be very effective at slowing down the rate and the growth and this. The United States has this attachment to abortion for which it is paying a hideous price. You look at the laws that the Colorado legislature passed this year.
Shocking.
It's 20 years ago, I never would have believed it would happen in Colorado. And yet it's just a rapid decline. So we can sit back and we can hire preachers and we can support legislators to go out and do something, but we can't sit on our own ass.
Well, and I think it's useful to look back at how the founders handled this. And if you notice, there isn't any discussion of abortion. I mean, the word abortion does not appear in the Constitution. You won't find it in the Federalist Papers. You won't find it in any of our founding documents. Why? Because that was a heinous thing at that time. And our founders didn't want anything to do with it, which is kind of one of your points, Tom, that when you pass a law, you're kind of furthering it along. But I completely agree with both of you that the only way that you're going to solve this is change the culture. Instead of having a culture of death, we have one of life. But I still say, we should. I'm kind of with Ken on this one, that we should restrict it in wherever we can. Now let's kind of all the way back to the platform.
Just right there. Yeah, obviously, most people felt that way because, like I said, yeah. I was the sole pro-life vote against that. I was the only one looking at this saying we're hurting. It's a Pyrrhic victory. if we do this. So yeah, I get it. I'm in the minority position, and no one's coming to my side. But I just want to put people's mind at ease if they're just like, oh, he's slipping. But if anything, I should give people some confidence that I've got a set of principles that I will not bend on, no matter how much pressure I get.
That last point that you made is, perhaps a good one to end on. That the few people that have raised a question, hey, we got to talk to Tom about this, or let's talk about, the vote on this bill. The response online has been kind of interesting in that, they're attacking Tom. Well, I don't see it that way. I see it, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation and see if we can, put our heads together and come up with a solution. But Tom, I'll give you the last word.
Oh boy, this is such a big thing, having the last word on this type of thing. Well, it's good to be talking to you guys again. I mean, I've talked to you guys in privately, but we haven't done a show together in a long time. I would say the one last thing that people need to do, piggybacking off what Ken said about, and what you were saying about the culture of life, the left likes to talk about pro-life as being pro-birth, which, yeah, you may force birth, and then who cares about the kids? But as I've said in other venues, it's life and liberty, not life then socialism. And I completely reject the argument that if you're pro-life, that means you must be for the government feeding everyone, the government giving everyone health care. No. It's life then liberty, not life then socialism. However, I do implore pro-life people to step up and do their best. Don't vote for the people who are going to force somebody else to do it. You do it yourself. If there's a struggling single mom, you give up your time so she can go to work or go to the store or take a break, or you give up some money for diapers and food. If there are people who are struggling, if you're going to be out there beating your chest about how pro-human and pro-life you are, then please take the time to help one another. And then we undercut that argument that the state has to do it.
Well, Tom, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. We went way longer than I had planned, but that's good. We should do this more often.
No, we could have kept going easily.
You already know you're welcome here anytime, and I just appreciate it.
All right, thanks, guys.
Well, that'll do it for today's installment of the program. Have a good week, and we'll talk again on Wednesday. For now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.